Hello everyone, thank you for joining today. I'm going to talk a bit about my paper on the role of research in supporting community-based models for online content moderation. The paper is very long, so my talk here will be a bit short to make up for it. So this paper is three things. First, it's an argument about the value of research on community self-moderation and why that domain of research is maybe not heard from enough. Second, it's a literature review of the history of research on moderation in online spaces going back to around 1980. I talk about some work that's already well known, but also a bunch of stuff that hasn't really gotten the attention I think it deserves. And finally, the paper is a set of directions that could be really fruitful, I think, for improving community self-moderation. So I argue that there are two major non-exclusive perspectives in content moderation research. The first is what I call the platforms and policies perspective, which works under the assumption that in the future, most or all moderation is going to be done centrally by companies and in some cases via governments and policies. The second perspective is the communities perspective, which works from the idea that there are a lot of spaces online where users are kind of moderating themselves, and that we should understand how this works in order to help make it one viable model for moderation that could complement the platform-driven approach. There's a lot of overlap between these two perspectives, but there are also some ways they often differ. The community's perspective tends to be more directly user-focused and empirical, studying the experiences of real individual users and communities. The platforms and policies perspective tends to be more focused on bigger news items, the kind of issues that are being widely discussed and debated in popular discourse. This makes this perspective's work more publicly visible. These generalizations don't always apply, but often I think they do. So the second part of the paper is a broad literature review of work in both perspectives, and I'm not going to go over that here, but if you're curious, here's a link to a list of around 80 papers in the community's perspective that I think are a good place to start if you're really interested in getting to know the domain. And finally, the paper finishes with 6 questions that I think are good places to look in order to help improve approaches to community self-moderation so that they're more viable in a wider variety of cases. And I go through each of these in the paper and talk about what has been done and what could be done and why it's important. The 6 questions are: what makes a community more self-moderatable? How can we make community self-moderation more context-sensitive rather than uniform across all contexts? How does one become an effective community moderator, or what does good moderator training look like? How can we make better community moderation tools, specifically in terms of usability and transparency? How can we bridge the gaps between community moderators and platform administrators? And how can we make community self-moderation more democratic or participatory? So I'd love it if you take a few minutes to read through this. You might find it useful if you're new to the topic and interested in learning more. You're not new to the topic but interested in this perspective, or you think community self-moderation is a fantasy and want to tear apart my ridiculous argument. I'll take any of the three. Thank you very much, and here again is a link to the paper and also the list of prior work.